They demoted me like I didn't matter. I still remember the heat rising in my face as they sat me down and told me I was being realigned, a word so polished it almost hid the humiliation underneath. After 18 years of carrying that company through failures, late nights, and crises no one else could fix, they spoke to me like I was a burden they finally had the courage to drop. I walked out of that room feeling small, until I opened a contract they clearly forgot I had, and everything shifted. If you've ever been underestimated, stay with me and tell me in the comments. And if stories like this hit home, consider subscribing for more. I used to think stability was something you earned, something you built year after year through consistency, late nights, and showing up even when no one else did. That morning started like 100 others. I got in early, poured myself the same bitter office coffee, and opened the Henderson rollout dashboard to prep for our team sync. Nothing felt unusual. In fact, the quiet hum of the building felt almost comforting, the kind of calm I used to think meant everything was on track. I'd been at North Peak Dynamics for so long that I could read the company's moods like weather patterns. When the engineers were tense, deadlines were slipping. When the executives were suddenly cheerful, something big was coming. But that week, everything felt muted, too still. People weren't making eye contact in the hallways. Conversations cut off when I walked into a room. I figured it was just pre-launch stress. We'd been pushing our systems upgrade for months, and I'd been carrying more than my share of the load. Not because anyone asked, but because I couldn't stand watching things crumble when I knew I could fix them. 18 years at one company gives you a strange sense of responsibility. You start to feel like you're part of the structure itself, holding beams in place that no one else even realizes are weak. My office sat on the 18th floor, a glass corner space overlooking downtown Denver, the kind of office you fight for, the kind you earn. I'd negotiated for it years ago, not out of ego, but because it was quiet enough to think. The early sun poured across my desk, lighting up the stack of architecture diagrams I'd spent half the night revising. I should have been tired, but I wasn't. I loved this work. I loved building things that didn't break, systems people could rely on even when life was unpredictable. Maybe that's why I missed the warning signs, the budget freeze, the temporary hiring pause that never lifted, the executive meetings I was suddenly excluded from, the new financial reports that never made it to my inbox. Even the way Brent, our COO turned CEO, avoided talking to me unless it was in a group setting. I chalked it up to leadership pressure. Funding rounds make executives strange, but looking back, all those little moments should have snapped. Something awake inside me should have told me I was standing on a trapdoor and someone's hand was already on the lever. When I walked into the morning stand-up, my team looked different. Not upset exactly, but cautious. Careful with their words. I brushed it off, ran through our tasks, gave feedback, and kept things moving. Leading this team had been the best part of my career. I'd hired most of them myself, trained them, fought for their salaries, shielded them from the political storms upstairs. I thought that kind of loyalty meant something. I thought it bought protection. But as I left the room, heading back toward my office with notes in hand, I caught Rita, another director, watching me with something that wasn't quite pity, but close. It was the moment my stomach dipped just slightly. Something was coming, something big. And I had no idea it was about to change everything. I was halfway through reviewing a deployment checklist when my phone buzzed with a calendar notification I didn't recognize. Meeting with Brent and HR, 10:30 a.m., conference room 21B. No agenda, no context. Just the kind of vague, sterile entry that makes your chest tighten before your brain even knows why. I stared at it longer than I should have, trying to make sense of it. We didn't have anything scheduled. No performance review, no project escalation, no budget discussion, nothing. Still, I told myself it was probably nothing serious. Maybe a last-minute question about the Henderson timeline or some new compliance update. Those thoughts lasted all of 30 seconds, because when I stepped into conference room 21B, the air changed. The blinds were halfway drawn, letting in a thin slice of light that fell across the long table like a spotlight. Brent was already sitting there, his laptop angled away from me like he didn't want me to see whatever was on the screen. He didn't smile, didn't stand, didn't even attempt that fake executive warmth he usually performed so well. And next to him sat Linda from HR with a thick manila folder resting on her lap, unopened but very intentionally placed where I could see it. My pulse kicked hard. "Elsie," Brent said, smoothing an invisible wrinkle on his shirt sleeve. "Thanks for joining us." Joining us, like I'd been invited to something collaborative instead of ambushed. I sat down slowly, setting my notebook in front of me even though I already knew I wouldn't be writing anything down. Brent cleared his throat. "We need to discuss restructuring," he began, using the same careful tone executives use when they know they're about to wreck someone's life but don't want to feel guilty about it. "The board is pushing for a significant reduction in operational overhead." I let out a slow breath. "What does that mean for my team?" He avoided my eyes. "We're flattening the architecture leadership model." Linda finally opened the folder. That soft paper rustle was louder than it should have been, like someone tearing fabric in a quiet room. "Your role as principal systems architect is being eliminated," she said gently, like softening the delivery would somehow soften the blow. "We'd like to offer you a position as a systems engineer." My jaw tightened. "A demotion." "A transition," she corrected, her voice full of that polished corporate sympathy that feels like sandpaper when you're on the receiving end. "Same team, similar responsibilities, just a different reporting structure." I stared at them both. 8 years building this division, 18 years keeping their infrastructure from collapsing, and they wanted to pretend this was a lateral move. "What's the salary?" I asked, even though I already knew I wouldn't like the answer. Brent shifted in his chair. 85,000. I blinked. I made 155. They were cutting me by nearly half. "You're asking me to take a 45% pay cut," I said, every word slicing through the air. "It's the only way we can retain your role in the organization," Linda said, hands folded neatly on the folder. "Otherwise, your position would have to be eliminated entirely." The room went colder. The hum of the vent above us felt too loud, like it was mocking the silence between us. "What about my equity vesting schedule?" I asked. "It continues as normal," Brent said, but the hesitation in his voice was unmistakable. It was a hesitation that said he hadn't thought this through, a hesitation that said he wanted this conversation over with as quickly as possible because he knew how wrong it was. I looked at the paper Linda slid across the table. A one-page offer, printed that morning, no detail, no dignity, just a signature line waiting for me to sign away my seniority, my authority, my years of work. And then came the humiliation, the one moment that sears itself into memory like a burn. Brent finally met my eyes and said, "You've mentioned you miss hands-on work. Consider this a chance to get back to the technical roots you love?" Technical roots, like stripping away my leadership, my salary, and my influence was some kind of gift, like I should thank them for kicking me backwards. My throat tightened. "I'll need to review my current employment agreement," I said carefully, controlling every syllable. Something flickered across Brent's face. Confusion, concern, fear, hard to tell, but I saw it, and it was the first moment, just a small, sharp second, where I realized they might not understand what they'd just triggered. "Of course," Linda said quickly. "We'll need an answer by Friday at 5. I stood, picked up the paper, and walked out of that room feeling smaller than I had in years. But beneath the humiliation, beneath the disbelief, something else stirred, something quiet and steady, the faintest hint that they'd miscalculated. Badly, I didn't. Go back to my office right away. I walked the hallway slowly, letting the fluorescent lights blur as my mind replayed every second of that meeting. The humiliation sat heavy on my chest, like someone had pressed their thumb right into the center of me and refused to lift it. A demotion, a 45% pay cut, a forced smile from HR, and a CEO who couldn't even look me in the eye while dismantling the career I'd built brick by brick. By the time I reached my office, my quiet glass corner overlooking downtown, the building felt different. Or maybe I felt different. I closed the door, locked it without thinking, and set the demotion offer on my desk like it was something radioactive. For a few seconds, I just stared at it. That thin sheet of paper represented everything they thought I'd accept without a fight. Everything they assumed I wouldn't question. As if nearly 2 decades of work had softened me into something compliant, something grateful just to be included at all. They expected me to fold, to be afraid. Maybe that's what stung the most. I sank into my chair and opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet, the one I rarely touched where I kept documents that mattered: wills, house papers, old tax files. And then, beneath a stack of folders, I saw it. A binder with a faded North Peak logo. My original employment contract. The one Daniel Avery, North Peak's founder, had personally negotiated with me 8 years ago when he recruited me away from a competitor. Back then, the company was smaller, scrappier, fighting to retain talent, and Daniel was the kind of leader who meant it when he said he valued people. I pulled the contract onto my desk and flipped it open. The pages were thick, the signatures bold, the ink reliably intact. I remembered sitting across from Daniel in a different conference room, sunlight pouring in as he slid this exact contract toward me and said, "If you're going to build the backbone of this company, you should feel secure doing it." I had taken him seriously. Apparently, Brent never had. I turned to the section I vaguely remembered from years ago, something about role changes, something about compensation protections, and scanned until the words hit me like a jolt. Section 9, Subsection B, Constructive Role Change. I read it once, then again slower. In the event that the employee's title, compensation, or material responsibilities are reduced without written consent, such action shall constitute a constructive role change. In such cases, the employee shall be entitled to 1. Severance compensation equal to 2.5 years of base salary at time of change. 2. Immediate vesting of all unvested equity. 3. Continuation of health benefits for 30 months. I sat frozen. Then I started calculating. My current salary, $155,000. 2.5 years, $387,500. My unvested equity, 65,000 shares across 2 grants. Current share value, around $31. That was over $2 million invested. Equity alone. My throat went dry. Brent had effectively tried to strip my role, cut my salary nearly in half, and demote me under the guise of restructuring without my consent. Which meant the clause wasn't just relevant, it was triggered, and they either didn't know or didn't think I'd remember it. A slow, simmering heat built in my chest. Not anger exactly, something sharper, something alive. I grabbed my phone and photographed every page of the contract, front to back, then backed up the photos to 2 separate cloud drives. Old habit. Years of building fail-safes into systems had wired my brain to do the same in real life. After that, I opened a spreadsheet and ran numbers again, this time more carefully. Severance, $387,500. Equity, roughly $15,000. Benefits, 30 months of coverage. The total value of forcing me out was staggering, and the irony hit me. I wasn't the one who'd set this trap. They had. Years before Brent even stepped into leadership, the founder had written a protection so ironclad it might as well have been engraved in steel. They triggered it themselves, and now the only question was whether they'd realize the mistake before I made them pay for it. I leaned back in my chair, the city skyline glowing through the glass behind me. For the first time since that awful meeting, a small, steady calm settled into my bones. They thought they'd cornered me, but they never checked the walls of the corner. They never saw the exit door I had memorized years ago. I closed the binder carefully. This wasn't fear anymore. This was strategy, and the game had just shifted entirely in my favor. I didn't sleep much that night. My mind kept replaying the contract clause over and over, like a song stuck on a loop, but getting sharper each time. By sunrise, I'd already showered, dressed, and triple-checked the files I planned to bring. At 10 a.m., I walked into the small brick building where my attorney, Mark Turner, kept his practice, a converted craftsman home that still smelled faintly like cedar and old coffee. A far cry from the polished steel and glass of North Peak, and somehow that made me feel grounded. Mark looked up from his desk, adjusted his glasses, and gave me the kind of look only lawyers and doctors seem to master. Calm, steady, prepared for whatever storm you're about to drop into their lap. "All right," he said, "tell me everything." I did. I told him about the meeting, the demotion, the salary cut, the forced framing of it as a transition. I told him how they pushed a one-page offer across the table like it was a formality instead of an insult. And when I pulled out my original contract and pointed to Section 9, subsection B, he leaned forward, scanning it with a low whistle. "Did they have legal review this before offering the demotion?" he asked. "I don't think so," I said. "Or if they did, someone missed something huge." "Someone missed something massive," corrected, tapping the clause with the back of his pen. "Elsie, this isn't vague language, this is explicit. Compensation reduced, title changed, responsibilities shifted. Any one of those triggers constructive role change. They triggered all three." I felt a twinge of relief, but I didn't let hope run ahead of me. "What do we do next?" "You decline the demotion in writing," he said, "and you explicitly invoke this clause. No emotion, no story, no negotiation. Just state the facts." He outlined the rest carefully. "Send it to HR, the CEO, and General Counsel. Attach the clause. Request severance calculation and timeline. Keep everything calm and cold." "They'll push back," he warned. "Hard. They always do when money is involved. But this clause, this is airtight. You're in a stronger position than they are." By the time I left his office, I had a draft letter ready in my inbox. I spent the afternoon at work pretending everything was normal, attending meetings, reviewing documentation, answering Slack messages, while beneath it all, I carried the knowledge that the ground beneath North Peak's executive team was starting to crack. I waited until Thursday evening to send the letter, part strategy, part nerves. At 8:42 p.m., I finally hit send. The message whooshed out, and instantly my heart began to race. There was no undoing it now. Friday morning, North Peak felt different the moment I walked in. People spoke in lower tones. Eyes lingered on me a second too long. Something was circulating upstairs. At 11:05 a.m., Brent stopped by my office, wearing the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. "Got your message," he said lightly, though his voice was tight. "Patricia told me you're formally declining the transition." Transition. They were really clinging to that word. "I am," I said evenly. "It violates the terms of my original contract." For a split second, he looked irritated, like I'd inconvenienced him by remembering my own employment rights. "Look, Elsie," he said, leaning casually against my doorframe. "I think we can talk this out. The salary number isn't fixed. Maybe we can get you closer to, I don't know, 95? As if offering me back a sliver of what he'd taken would make me forget the rest. "My contract doesn't hinge on negotiation," I said. "It's very clear about what happens when my title and compensation are changed without consent." His jaw tightened. He didn't like that answer, but he didn't push. Not then. At 3:17 p.m., I received an email from Karen, the General Counsel, requesting a meeting first thing Monday with executive leadership and external advisors. The phrasing was polite. The subtext was not. They were gearing up for a fight. Monday arrived with a tension thick enough to taste. I took the elevator to the 22nd floor, where the senior conference rooms were. The hallway was lined with glass panels that looked out over the city, but even the skyline felt heavy. Karen greeted me with a nod. Then I saw him, an older man in an expensive suit, silver hair, leather briefcase. External counsel, of course. He introduced himself as Robert Langford. "Ms. Rowan," he said, "we've reviewed your letter. There are questions about the interpretation of your contract." Questions. That was their opening move. Pretend ambiguity where none existed. I sat down without flinching. "Then let's discuss them." Because I wasn't afraid. I knew what they had triggered. And for the first time, I suspected they were starting to realize it too. Robert adjusted his glasses and folded his hands neatly on the polished table, the picture of controlled confidence. But there was something off. something tight around his mouth, something guarded in his posture. "We believe," he began, "that the shift to systems engineer does not constitute a substantial diminishment of your responsibilities. You will still be performing technical work and contributing to critical projects." I let him finish, even though every sentence felt like an insult wrapped in legal politeness. "My title is being reduced," I said calmly. "My compensation is being cut by almost half, and the leadership responsibilities I've held for years are being reassigned. Section 9B doesn't ask for my interpretation. It states explicitly that any reduction without consent triggers constructive role change." Brent exhaled sharply through his nose, barely disguising his frustration. "You're making this adversarial," he said. "We're trying to find a middle ground." Middle ground, as if we were negotiating a parking spot instead of my entire career. Robert stepped in again, likely sensing Brent was more liability than help. "Litigation is costly for both sides. We'd prefer an amicable solution. The company is prepared to offer 6 months' salary and vesting through the end of the year." 6 months, a fraction of what they owed me, the equivalent of someone tossing spare change into a jar and calling it generosity. "No," I said, a single word delivered without apology. Brent leaned forward. "Elsie, think about this. Really think. The board isn't going to pay out what you're demanding." "I'm not demanding anything," I replied. "I'm invoking what your company agreed to in writing." Karen, who had been silent until then, finally spoke, her voice steady but strained. "We'll need time to reassess the language. We'll reach out once our counsel has completed a full review." They dismissed me soon after, not rudely but abruptly, like they needed me out of the room before the panic in their eyes began leaking onto the table. In the elevator down, I let myself breathe again. They were rattled, and rattled executives made mistakes. Over the next 2 days, the tension around North Peak became impossible to ignore. Departments whispered, meetings ran longer than usual. People avoided me with the kind of deliberate caution normally reserved for crime scenes. Wednesday morning, I got another email. A revised offer. 1 year of salary, vesting through June. Better, but still nowhere near what the contract required. I declined with a 2-sentence reply, citing the same clause, the same language. Thursday afternoon, Brent appeared at my door again, but this time he didn't bother with a smile. He shut the door behind him, rubbing the back of his neck like someone carrying a secret too heavy to keep holding. "The board is watching this," he said quietly. "Your severance would hit our quarterly numbers. It could tank our valuation before the funding round closes." "Not my problem," I said. For a moment he looked genuinely shocked, as if no one in his career had ever told him that. "Elsie, be reasonable." "You demoted me," I cut in. "You stripped my title, gutted my salary, and expected me to accept it quietly. Reasonable left the room when you made that choice." His cheeks flushed. "We're offering you options. None that match my contract." He swallowed hard, shoulders sagging. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered sitting in that conference room, my humiliation laid bare under fluorescent lights, and the sympathy died immediately. Friday morning, another meeting request arrived. "Executive conference room, 10 a.m. No details, no agenda, just like the first time. But this time, I wasn't walking in blind. I walked toward that room with more certainty than anger, more clarity than fear. They had pushed, threatened, negotiated, appealed, and insisted. None of it worked, and I knew, down to my bones, that they were running out of moves. They thought I was cornered. But the truth was, they were the ones who had nowhere left to go. When I stepped into the executive conference room that Friday morning, the air felt heavier than usual, as if the walls themselves were bracing for impact. Karen was already seated, hands clasped tightly, her expression unreadable. Linda sat beside her with a stack of papers she didn't seem eager to touch. And then there was Brent, pacing near the window, jaw tight, his confidence worn thin after a week of scrambling. Robert, the outside counsel, stood as I entered, but even he looked drained, like someone who'd spent far too many hours digging through a contract he wished had never existed. "Elsie, Robert began, motioning toward an empty seat across from him. "Thank you for meeting with us." I sat without responding. I wasn't here for pleasantries, I was here for closure. He cleared his throat. "We've completed our legal review of your employment agreement." A long pause, one loaded with resignation. Then, North Peak Dynamics will comply fully with the terms outlined in Section 9, subsection B. Brent stopped pacing. He didn't speak, didn't look at me, didn't look at anyone. Karen slid a document toward me, thick, stapled, and marked with bright tabs. "This is your separation agreement. It outlines the severance package, 2.5 years of salary to be paid in a lump sum within 30 days, immediate vesting of all unvested equity, and continuation of health benefits for 30 months. She breathed in slowly. "We're requesting a standard mutual non-disparagement clause and confidentiality regarding the specific terms." My heart pounded once, hard, but my voice stayed steady. "I'll have my attorney review it." "Of course," Robert said quickly. Too quickly. They were eager to end this, desperate even. Linda's hands trembled as she passed me a pen, not to sign but to acknowledge receipt. It struck me then, they weren't afraid of losing me. They were afraid of what keeping their promise would cost. Brent finally sank into a chair, shoulders slumped, the weight of the financial hit written all over his face. North Peak wasn't a massive corporation. A payout of this size would ripple through the company like a fault line. The funding round, the board, the quarterly numbers, they were all about to feel it. When the meeting ended, there was no handshake, no polite farewell. Just silence. Heavy, defeated silence. I walked out of the conference room with the agreement tucked under my arm and an unexpected sense of stillness settling over me. Not triumph, not yet, but certainty. They had underestimated me. They had misread me. And now, because they didn't bother to understand the contract they inherited, their entire leadership structure was about to pay the price. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The fall had already started. I signed the separation agreement the following Tuesday, sitting across from Karen and a quiet notary who barely lifted his eyes from the paperwork. No speeches, no apologies, just signatures, stamps, and the soft shuffle of pages sealing the end of nearly 2 decades. When the final copy slid across the table toward me, I felt something I hadn't felt since before the demotion meeting. Breath, real breath. The kind that expands your chest instead of tightening it. 2 days later, the severance hit my account. The number didn't look real at first. It felt like an extra zero had been added by mistake. But it was there. Every dollar they owed me, every cent they triggered themselves. And my equity? Fully vested. Overnight, I went from worrying about whether I'd even keep my job to having the kind of financial cushion people dream about. I took a month off, slept in, cooked meals slowly instead of inhaling energy bars between meetings, spent afternoons with old friends who'd forgotten what I looked like in daylight, and somewhere between the quiet mornings and calmer evenings, I felt something loosen that I hadn't realized had been clenched for years. By March, I wasn't looking for a new job, but the offers started coming anyway. Word travels fast. In the tech world, especially when a company mishandles a senior leader badly enough to shake investor confidence. When a high-growth infrastructure startup offered me a VP role with a salary higher than anything North Peak ever gave me, I said yes without hesitation. Sometimes people ask if I regret leaving. I don't. Not for a second. Sometimes the fall you're pushed into becomes the path you were supposed to take all along. And if you've ever been underestimated or pushed aside, tell me your story in the comments. I promise, I understand. I learned something through all of this that I wish someone had told me earlier. You can give a company years of your life. You can pour your talent and your energy and your loyalty into it. But if you don't protect yourself, they can take everything away in a single meeting. I used to believe hard work spoke for itself, that consistency was enough to earn safety. But the truth is, even in good companies, leadership changes, priorities shift, and the people making decisions about your future may not know you, value you, or even understand what you've built. So you have to know your rights. You have to understand the agreements you sign. You have to treat your own career with the same level of care you'd give to a system you're responsible for. And more than anything, you have to remember that self-respect isn't negotiable. My revenge wasn't about destroying them. It was about making them face the consequences of treating a loyal employee like a disposable expense. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was grounded in preparation, facts, and a contract they never thought I'd remember. And yes, I walked away with more than they ever imagined. But the real win was internal. I walked away without bitterness. Sometimes forgiveness is self-liberation, but sometimes silence is the sharpest knife. Letting them watch their own decisions unravel was lesson enough. In real life, that's what I'd tell anyone facing something similar. Protect your documentation, keep copies of everything, and don't let shame or shock make you forget your own value. Advocate for yourself, even when your voice shakes, and understand that not every battle needs anger. Sometimes the most powerful victory comes from staying calm, while the truth does the cutting for you. How to get started today. Read your employment contract. Really read it. Back up important documents somewhere only you control. Make a list of your accomplishments so no one can rewrite your history. If something feels wrong at work, write it down. Documentation is power. And if you've been through something like this, or if you're afraid you might someday, tell me your story in the comments. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe.